I was born in St. Pete. I've been, drawing and painting since I was a little kid. I used to draw over these structural steel blueprints that my dad would bring home. He was a structural steel draftsman, so he'd have all these thick paper and it was all blueprints. So he would bring extra rolls of it home, and that was like our drawing paper. It's all engineering documents, so it's very linear. My brother and sister and I would draw all over those with markers, and we'd draw like scenes and almost like we're trying to build animation. A lot of my major paintings, when I started actually painting, with the purpose, I would start by building this kind of like lattice work of real strict geometry, even doing some paint tape masking, paint over that and then peel the tape off so you get these really straight lines and grids. And then I would go a little more wild over the grid, almost mess it up. So something was maybe attached to the grid or living on the grid, or was a bunch of animals and plants growing on it. So always trying to kind of mix those two, like a harsh geometry with more organic plant forms and stuff. And these will go through so many different layers that, the beginning is just super kind of wild and fun. I know when I was in college studying architecture, a lot of my work, I started building projects based on paintings. I knew that painting and drawing was part of my core language and how I expressed ideas. I went to a pretty theoretical undergrad school at University of Florida where we would base buildings off of wild things, like we'd study a poem, or we'd study a play or a painting and make a building based on more of an abstract concept like that. And so I excelled at that. I loved that. I had a professor once looking through one of my sketchbooks, and I had like tons of sketchbooks, and they'd be filled with everything that inspired me, said to me, this is great, but could you take a semester and make one of these, but have it just all be architecture? I remember him saying that. I'll never forget it, because I said to him, yeah, I can do that. But inside I was like, man, I don't think I can do that. I think in a lot of ways my work is a sort of poetic, dreamy reflection of our natural and built environment and the way we interact with it. I'd like people to pull small bits of that narrative when they see my work. A lot of my work has a combination of architecture and figurative work together. So like bodies are buildings and buildings are bodies, and there's the human nature aspect to it that I hope people connect to, and then thinking about our bodies in space and the space we create and what we do to our environment to create that space is something that I hope my audience would glean from the work. Moving to New York was amazing to me, and I was drawn to it, and I spent over 20 years living up there. I like the dichotomy between Florida and natural landscape and New York and the hyper-urban conditions. So both of those are super inspiring to me. Seeing the buildings and the architecture density was immediately like striking. I immediately felt like I wanted to move there right away just because of that. Couple that with the social element of a city where everyone is living in so much closer proximity, so there tends to be a lot more community and a lot more dialogue between people. I loved it. It just fed my creativity, and it also kind of just fed my soul. You take a subway ride and you're just seeing all these buildings fly by at the window. I would be staring out the window almost like I was riding in a plane, just like looking at clouds, but you're looking at buildings going by. You feel like you're part of a big social machine. Maybe 4 or 5 years into living in New York City, a really good friend of mine who I've known since I was in high school landed me a big commission. So I'd been working and making like small paintings just out of my apartment, selling prints and, working odd jobs on the side, doing like web design and all sorts of digital media stuff. And then my friend, he was working at a software company out in California, and he introduced his boss to some of my work. They were looking for artwork for their lobby in Los Angeles, and he got me a commission to do a giant piece. I was working from home in Brooklyn out of a small like railroad apartment, and I decided like, oh, I'll just do a giant oil painting. And I put a proposal together and landed the commission, and it was like boom, here we go. I had the frames like built professionally, and I was just working on that for months just out of my apartment. And it kind of like took over the entire apartment and just loomed over me constantly, but I was kind of like living in it for months. From there, I got a bunch of commissions from that work. When I started working here out of St. Pete, I was just looking for any place I could show my work. So I entered into a lot of group shows, and that's a great way to network and find other artists and get your work out there. And at this time in my life, I feel like I'm in this rapid iteration where I've surrounded myself with these really inspiring colleagues who are constantly giving me ideas and helping me out. And I can only hope I'm doing the same just by, working alongside them. I'm working through a lot of different styles to kind of find my way and find something that works. So as an artist, you try to build a whole series, maybe starts to tell a bigger story. You put together 15 to 20 pieces and they're kind of all part of a group or part of a narrative. When you do that, the work all together makes sense. So you kind of want to show everything, sort of like you intended. Showing your work publicly can be daunting too, because all this effort goes into your self-curation and building everything up, and it's usually for one or two big event nights, and it's a social thing. And then, in the back of your mind as an artist and then also as a professional, you're like, well, I'd like to sell some work. I'd like to get my work into the hands of people who love it. Finding your audience, it's a different game, and that can take a long time. You have to be very patient, and you have to love what you're doing. It's a difficult business to be in, for sure. I think right now I want to make really large-scale painting work. That's exciting to me. And I think ever since I did that large commission years ago, I've wanted to make work that's more at the scale of our own human bodies. Right now I'm making these 60 by 80 inch tall paintings, and I can feel a lot more if I'm working on a piece that is bigger than my own body. There's something really interesting about that. And as I grow older, I realize that drawing and painting is more of a language for me. I'm using painting as a way to process my experience and, emotions and interactions and things that happen and things I see. And it kind of becomes a second nature of a way to communicate after a while. Working out of a studio is just incredible. There's a lot of cross-communication between artists. We're giving each other feedback, and I'm constantly getting ideas and constructive feedback from my peers. I'm constantly being inspired by the artists who are around me, and I feel like I'm surrounded by a bunch of really, really great professional artists, and I always feel like I'm just trying to keep up, but I love it, and that's a great place to be in. At my age, I'm still super excited to just see artwork and to experience the world and just go for a walk with no destination. So that kind of childlike wonder and sort of enthusiasm for life, I'd like to think that kind of shows in my work. And if it inspires any kind of joy or curiosity, then that's good enough. That's what it's all about. So